Can anyone govern Gaza? Foreign Affairs, July 30, 2024. When the brutal war in the Gaza Strip ends, someone will have to govern the land. That is a job that many groups have taken on. Israel occupied the Strip from 1967, when it conquered Gaza, until 1994, when it transferred formal control of most matters to the newly formed Palestinian Authority, PA. In the first phase of the Oslo peace talks, though, the Israelis maintained 21 settlements there until 2005. In 2006, Hamas won legislative elections in the Palestinian territories, and in 2007 it forcibly drove its opponents out of Gaza. Hamas has since ruled Gaza, though it remains largely constrained by Israel, until Israel ousted it in response to the attacks on October 7, 2023. Today, Gaza has no functioning government. When the fighting stops, Gaza will remain a political and economic wasteland. More than 38,000 Gazans have died as of mid-July, according to the Gaza Ministry of Health. According to UNRWA, 1.9 million people, about 80% of the territory's population, have been displaced. According to the World Health Organization, about 80% of Gaza's civilian infrastructure, such as homes, hospitals, water, and sanitation facilities, has been destroyed or damaged. Now that Hamas no longer governs the enclave, crime is rampant. Gaza's economy was already stagnant before October 7, but now it has no economy at all. The population will be even more dependent on outside aid than before. These problems will be difficult to overcome even if Israel, Hamas, and the United States agree on Gaza's future. But each side has a different vision. Hamas, of course, wants to survive, regain power in Gaza, and gradually eclipse the PA to dominate the Palestinian national movement. For its part, Israel wants a Gaza government that has no ties to Hamas, but it doubts the ability of other existing Palestinian organizations to take over. Israel blames the PA, which controls much of the West Bank and has long cooperated with Israel to suppress Hamas, for maintaining a tolerance for extremism that implicitly encourages terrorist attacks. The United States, meanwhile, hopes that the PA will govern Gaza and eventually become a more reliable partner in negotiations for the long-sought two-state solution. Palestinians in Gaza have no voice, but they are seeking an end to the conflict, the restoration of essential services, and a path to prosperity and national independence. Their aspirations should not be confused with those of Hamas. The group had little support in Gaza before October 7, and while the war has greatly enhanced Hamas's standing, some Palestinians in Gaza blame the group for leaving civilians defenseless and without food or water in the face of Israel's understandably destructive response to the October offensive. If the death and starvation of their people doesn't make a difference to them, then they don't make a difference to us, Motaz Azizat, a Gazan photojournalist, wrote in a March post that appeared to allude to Hamas. There are at least 7 possible options for Gaza's future, none of which are good. Some options would make Hamas too powerful, while others would require Israel or foreign powers to occupy the territory at great expense. The best of these bad options is for the PA to run Gaza, but given Hamas and Israel's opposition to any elevation of the pause status, this option seems unlikely. The US and its allies should increase the likelihood of a PA-run government by pushing Israel to accept it, building up the PA's administrative and security capabilities, and demanding the resignation of the current PA leadership. That way, the US can avoid the worst-case scenario. Unfortunately, the most likely future for Gaza is a failed state in which Hamas retains some power and the Israeli military regularly invades to destroy the militant group. In such a scenario, Palestinian civilians would continue to suffer, but international outcry would be less likely as people around the world become desensitized to violence. Washington should prepare for a Gaza that is regularly ravaged by violence and famine, and do everything it can to prevent that grim outcome. Israel's occupation continues. One potential future for Gaza is for Israel to fully retake the territory. Israel has a significant military presence in the Strip, but it does not actually run it on a day-to-day basis, no one does. Many international organizations and charities, such as UNICEF and Doctors Without Borders, have tried to provide some services but have been hampered by the ongoing fighting, Israeli restrictions on their access to the territory, and the lack of a single source of funding. Goods entering Gaza, and the destruction of the enclave's health infrastructure. If Israel were to formally retake Gaza, it would be responsible for providing law and order, administering services such as sanitation and education, and acting as a kind of government there. Israel has experience in doing this. If Israel were to retake the territory, Gaza's sovereignty, which was limited before the war, would disappear entirely, but the population would be able to enjoy some peace and basic services. Eventually, Israel would likely hand over some power to local Palestinians, but that would be a process, even in the most optimistic scenario. Furthermore, Israel would regularly hunt down Hamas members to prevent them from returning, requiring regular military operations. Even before Hamas took power in 2006, the group had become deeply entrenched in Gaza's educational, social welfare, and religious institutions. Based on RAND analyst James Quinlivan's calculations of the scope of the stabilization operation, Israel would need to keep about 100,000 soldiers and police in Gaza indefinitely. They may need even more because Gaza is largely urban, making military operations particularly difficult. That's a huge number of personnel for Israel, a small country with a military that relies heavily on reserves, especially as it also faces a volatile West Bank and a possible war with Hezbollah, the Iran-backed Lebanese militant group. If Israel retakes Gaza with fewer troops, Hamas could return to parts of the Strip. That's exactly what happened. Hamas returned to Gaza City in January 2024 after Israel withdrew most of its forces, and Hamas fighters have since returned to many areas that Israeli officials consider pacified. Hamas will surely then launch a low-level insurgency against the Israeli army, carrying out a series of kidnappings and causing more casualties. The cost to Israel's international reputation will be even greater. Its image has been tattered, even among young people in the United States. Its most important ally. Violence in an occupied territory may not be as frequently reported as the fighting in the months after October 7, but it will continue to be a constant, preventing Israel from repairing the damage to its reputation. Ordinary Palestinians will also resent Israel's reoccupation. Their resentment of Israel is already strong, and has only grown since October. Moreover, reoccupation would be a setback for Palestinian statehood. Washington would also oppose this option, as it does not want to be seen as aiding a long-term occupation of Palestinian territory, and continued fighting would distract from other U.S. goals in the region, such as uniting allies against Iran. Hamas returns. An alternative option is for Gaza to essentially return to the status quo ante of October 7. Hamas would rule Gaza as it did from 2007 to 2023, albeit with greater difficulty. Israel's campaign dealt a heavy blow to Hamas, destroying much of its military infrastructure and killing many of its members. However, Hamas remains the strongest Palestinian force in Gaza and could regain control of the area. Hamas could then use Gaza as a base to rebuild its armed forces, launch attacks on Israel, and re-establish itself as a governing entity. Israel will conduct regular attacks on Hamas, trying to eliminate its leaders and prevent them from regrouping. Israel and Egypt will also severely restrict economic activity in the Strip. Hamas does not want to simply survive as an organization. It also wants to strengthen its relations with both Israel and its Palestinian rival, the PA, although Hamas leadership is divided over priorities. Pragmatic Hamas members, many of whom live outside Gaza, often seek influence among Palestinians in the West Bank and hope to become the dominant force in the Palestinian national movement. Hardliners, including Yahya Sinwar, Hamas leader in Gaza and the mastermind of the October 7 attack, are dedicated to destroying Israel and are willing to sacrifice its own people to achieve that goal. As was true before October 7, administering Gaza would expose Hamas to criticism that it is failing to provide services to ordinary Palestinians. It would also leave Hamas members particularly vulnerable to Israeli attacks, as administering Gaza would force Hamas leaders into the open, revealing deeper layers of their leadership. For Israel, the return of Hamas to power would be unacceptable. Israelis would wonder how they could coexist with a neighbor that launched such a sudden and brutal attack, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has repeatedly asserted that Israel is seeking total victory over Hamas. The United States would also balk at the prospect of an open return to power by Hamas. In a more plausible scenario, Hamas would exercise power behind the scenes, as Hezbollah has done in Lebanon. Although Hezbollah is the most powerful force in Lebanon, it typically holds only 12 to 15 of the 128 seats in parliament. Hezbollah limits the number of seats it holds to allow allied groups, including Christians, to win them, thereby giving the impression to outsiders that it does not dominate Lebanon. The alliance has occasionally held a majority in the legislature, and Hezbollah has controlled many government ministries for nearly 2 decades. Even if Hezbollah and its allies fail to win enough seats to control parliament, as they are now, Hezbollah's combination of political clout, military might, and street power and its willingness to assassinate opponents makes it a force to be reckoned with. Supporters of Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri learned that in 2005, when Hezbollah assassinated him for supporting the withdrawal of Syrian forces from Lebanon. Many Lebanese groups and communities oppose Hezbollah but respect its power. The group has a de facto veto over government formation and policy. Despite its influence, Hezbollah has avoided becoming the public face of Lebanon. It does not wield full power, and Western countries have cooperated with the Lebanese government while knowing that doing so indirectly funds some of Hezbollah's activities. A similar arrangement in Gaza would likely appeal to Hamas, which would prefer to be the power behind the throne. Even before October 7, Gaza's governance under international isolation had been a constant struggle. At some point over the past 16 years, Hamas had even considered arrangements in which its rival, the PA, would assume some responsibilities, while Hamas maintained its military and power base as part of a unified government. While the PA and Hamas have signed agreements supporting this idea, no true unity government has ever emerged. China's attempt to bring the two together earlier this month will likely suffer the same fate. In any case, with a behind-the-scenes role, Hamas can attack Israel when it wants and abandon the difficult task of rebuilding Gaza and providing services to its people. If Hamas were to stand behind a joint Palestinian puppet government in Gaza, the Israeli government could publicly declare that Hamas no longer governs Gaza, and foreign governments could send aid to the territory without openly supporting a terrorist government. Gazan civilians could thus receive some humanitarian relief, and if all parties accepted the arrangement, they would also enjoy a measure of stability. But the risks to Israel apart from accusations of hypocrisy are high. Hamas could control the flow of aid into Gaza and rebuild its own army without the Gaza government's interference. Israel could continue to carry out regular attacks to suppress terrorism, thereby endangering civilian lives and rendering the joint government in Gaza impotent and illegitimate. And since there is no other strong political organization in the Strip, any government in Gaza would be more beholden to Hamas than the Lebanese factions are to Hezbollah. PA return. The Biden administration's preferred approach is for the PA to take charge. The PA ran Gaza before Hamas took power in 2007. It now controls parts of the West Bank and enjoys support from much of the world, which recognizes it as the voice of the Palestinian people. For years, PA security forces have cooperated with Israel to fight Hamas in the West Bank and limit violence there. On paper, the PA still has an administrative presence in Gaza. It still pays some civil servants there, an arrangement that dates back to the PA's previous rule, and it has an opposition cabinet that claims to run education and security, though it does neither. If the PA is in charge, Arab countries will be more likely to cooperate with Israel to rebuild Gaza. Many Arab governments abhor Hamas because of its ties to the Muslim Brotherhood and Iran, both of which are political bogeymen for Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. But at the same time, it is politically risky for Arab governments to cooperate with Israel because it is deeply unpopular with the Arab people, especially when Israel is killing Palestinians every day. If Israel makes concessions to the PA and promises to move toward a two-state solution, Arab leaders can justify cooperating with Israel because it can give the Palestinians. It is clear that it has not abandoned the Palestinians. Unifying the leadership in Gaza and the West Bank would seem to be a positive step toward the establishment of a Palestinian state, a goal that is also supported by the United States, though not by the Israelis. But bringing the PA back will not be an easy solution. The PA's record in the West Bank is poor. It is deeply corrupt and fails to provide many essential services. It has not held real elections since 2006 because its leaders and foreign backers fear it will lose, and with good reason. Nearly 90% of Palestinians want Mahmoud Abbas, the PAS leader, now 88, to step down. Most importantly, many Palestinians see the PA as an Israeli stooge because it cooperates with Israeli security services. The PA's image has been tarnished every time Jewish extremists build new settlements or attack Palestinians. The PA has been credited with maintaining order to a certain extent. Now, as violence in the West Bank escalates, the PA may no longer be able to do so, according to the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Between October 7, 2023 and July 15, 2024, Israeli settlers attacked Palestinians more than 1,100 times. Despite the PA's history of cooperation with Israel, many Israeli politicians would likely oppose the idea of the PA taking control of Gaza. They claim that the PA has radicalized Palestinians, as evidenced by PA-approved schoolbooks that glorify violence against Israel, public buildings named after militants who have killed Israelis, and payments the PA makes to the families of Palestinians imprisoned for terrorism or killed fighting Israel. However, supporting the PA will mean nothing if Washington cannot convince Israelis to respect its authority and accept that a strong PA is in their best interests. While Netanyahu says he opposes a PA-run government in Gaza, Israeli security officials increasingly recognize that the total destruction of Hamas will not solve the country's long-term problems, and that they must find an alternative government for Gaza if Israel is to defeat Hamas. Leading opposition figures, including former War Cabinet members Yoav Gallant and Benny Gantz, also appear to be more open to the PA's role in Gaza. In June, Israeli military spokesman Daniel Hagari declared, "If we don't bring something else to Gaza, we'll end up with Hamas." He was right, and the best something else is the Palestinian Authority. As Middle East analyst Ehud Yari noted that same month, Hamas has been working on its own end of the world plan. The only way to defeat the group, then, is for the US, Israel, and the PA to come up with a better plan together. Daniel Beeman is a professor in the Security Studies program at Georgetown University and a senior fellow in the War, Unconventional Threats, and Terrorism program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies.